Chapter 1, Powerless. Kino Amark. The wings that I carried were sturdier than the last pair Mayo and I were able to come up with. This time we used coconut leaves. Mayo Kolo, my friend since I started schooling, trailed after me, his plump cheeks flushed from the 30-minute uphill toil. When I glanced at him, our grins reflected on each other's faces. "Do you think it'll work this time?" he asked. "We've run out of leaves to use as wings, they better work," I said. From our well-elevated vantage point, Mayo and I could spot the thatched roofs of the houses in Wawang village. From where we stood, the wind was blowing angrily by now. Maybe it was time to stop dallying and put to the test this dream that I held for so long, to fly. Mayo crouched beside me. I dropped the wings in front of me and breathed deeply. "This is it. My final attempt at flying," I said. "Do you really mean it?" "Your final attempt. I'm hoping it'll work this time. There won't be any need to go back to our drawings again. If I fly, it will be as awesome as having a power like the rest of the world does," I said. Although excited, I was equally terrified that this attempt would end like so many before it, in failure. Mayo grabbed the wings and shoved them against my back. "Let's put these on you so we'll know." I knelt so Mayo could tie the wings more accurately against my back with the thin Akea ropes. "It's too tight," I said, easing my shoulders against Mayo's grip. "Quit moving, or I won't be able to tie them to you loosely enough to let you flap them," he contested. I complied and knelt still. The wings were heavier than I expected, and somehow, my hope of flying was dampened. My hands and feet were clammy from anticipation, and my breath came in intermittent bursts. "Breathe slowly. Don't panic. Else you'll lose focus," Mayo said. I tried doing as I was told, but I gulped a mouthful of air instead and ended up coughing. "You're nervous," Mayo exclaimed. "I told you. It will be all right. Our calculations are perfect." "Easy for you to say," I muttered. "You're not the one who's going to get bruised if these wings don't work." "They will work. Then we can register ourselves in the Akea books this moon turn," he said. I frowned. Everyone in Akea had special abilities except for me. I did not understand why I had to be the exception, why the gods never gave me any power at all. But to remedy this unfortunate state of affairs, Mayo and I had discussed power plans, which were bound to make me appear as though I had power too. And flying, I decided, was what I wanted to have. I gripped the ropes that were tied against my wrists. That way, it would be easier for me to maneuver in the air. "Are you ready?" Mayo asked, trying to smile. "I think so," I said nervously. "Hold the wings first while we walk near the cliff." Mayo obliged. I could hear his breathing. He was anxious about this, too, I could sense it. He wanted me to fly so that we could present together in front of the Emperor during the next Akea Wine Festival, a moon turn from now. In a few heartbeats, Mayo and I were standing on the edge of the cliff that overlooked Wawang village. As my gaze fell to the gaping chasm below, my courage took the opposite path and ran up my spine instead, leaving only a bone-chilling shiver in its wake. "In case I fall, you know what to do, right? Run like the wind all the way down. If you're hurt, I will call Mistress Lamare. If you're successful, you will hear me shouting from here, cheering you on," Mayo said, "just like we discussed." I breathed in. I was ready. I knew I was. I walked closer to the precipice, and this time, Mayo was no longer gripping my wings. The wind blew harder, and I almost tripped. I looked up to the heavens. Birds were flying freely above the clouds. In a few seconds, I would be joining them, whirling up in the air, flying as though I were one of them. The thought made me glow. Maybe the gods would be so kind as to let me win this battle this time. I drew in a deep breath and opened my arms widely. I carefully stepped back a few steps, putting my arms down before I started to run. At the edge of the precipice, my toes almost went numb with anticipation. I sprang as hard as I could into the void, arms outstretched to receive my fate. The swirling wind swelled beneath my makeshift wings, and there I was, I could not believe it, Flying. Mayo was cheering deliriously from behind me as my soul burst forth an almost primal, woo-hoo. You're flying, Kino. You made it. We made you fly. Mayo yelled repeatedly. I stretched my arms out wide to gather in more air, and I soared higher. I was laughing, and tears escaped the corners of my eyes as success tugged at my heart. After all these years, I could boast of a power too. Flying may not be as extravagant as the other powers Akeans have, but it certainly defied my being powerless. I laughed and flapped my wings. And then, for a moment, the strong draft that lifted me suddenly fell still, and I lurched towards the ground. I flapped wildly to arrest the fall, now wide-eyed and fully panic-stricken. But as suddenly as it had vanished, the steady wind soon returned, and I was able to stabilize. The panic settled in entirely when, while flapping my wings furiously, I unceremoniously went from flying to falling. Maybe it was the weight of the wings. Or perhaps it was the suddenness of the change in the wind that made me lose my balance, I do not know. All I knew was that the ground had very quickly come into focus. I hurriedly flapped my wings again, and again, but to no avail. Mayo's cheers became a shrill scream, and I could not understand what he said next as I plummeted into the trees, their leaves and branches engulfing me in a welcoming embrace. Funny. It was as if the trees knew how fleeting that moment of success was and how ready they were to take me in, to lash at my body and teach me that flying was for the birds, not for a boy who would never be as special as everyone else in Akea.